every morning as I walk to school in the neighborhood that I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, I pass many of the same things. Graffiti-covered walls, people standing outside corners who never seem to leave, and sometimes things that a child should never see. Things like used needles, broken glass, and other drug paraphernalia. And also, as you might imagine, the unmistakable exchange of cash for things that at the time were unknown to me. It wasn't unusual to hear sirens or police cars parked outside my school or in the park across the street. For many of us, this was life. But despite the world around us, my home was different. You see, I was raised by a single mother, and while we didn't have much, we had love, real, unconditional love. My mother worked hard, but no matter how exhausted she was, she saw to it that me and my younger brother felt seen, valued, and always supported. She encouraged my curiosity. She made me feel like I mattered. And that love, though I didn't realize it at the time, was a likely major factor that protected me from falling into the same patterns I saw every day. Don't think for a minute I wasn't immune, because I wasn't. I wasn't immune from my environment. I saw things, and eventually I even learned what they were. In fact, I had friends whose stories ended very differently than my own. I remember Carlos, for example. He was my best friend in junior high. Carlos and I were inseparable in school, and at the time, we were also the tallest in our grade. That's me on the upper left-hand circled in red. This gave us a size advantage over most kids, which was something that we, in fact, used for good. Many kids relied on us to protect them from the bullies who tormented them, both in and outside of school. Carlos would often come home with me, I think because we actually worked well together, but also, truth be told, because he also very much enjoyed my mom's home cooking. One day, he confided in me that, in fact, whenever he would get home, his mother was rarely there, and he would always come home to an empty fridge. Carlos was a good guy and a good friend, which is why it's still difficult for me to remember the day that he tried recruiting me to become a drug runner, which is something that he had just recently entered into. I realized at that point that I needed to cut ties with Carlos, in part also, of course, at my mom's urging. I think he understood my reasons, or at least I like to think that he did. Eventually, Carlos stopped coming to school. I went on to graduate. That's me and my mom on graduation day. Sadly, though, a few days before graduation, I learned that sometime in that past year, Carlos had been struck by a New York City train in between train stations as he was trying to escape from the cops who were chasing after him. His story has stayed with me for many years, and for many years, I've often wondered why our paths were so very different. Of course, the answer is complicated. It's never just one thing. There's clearly an overabundance of social factors that would have played into this. But now that I've become a brain scientist or a neuroscientist, I realize that something in my brain, something very, very powerful, was shaped not just by what was around me, but also by what was inside my home. So you might wonder, what happened in my brain that kept me from going down the path that so many others that I grew up with took? I like to think that the answer is love and support. What I had from my mother helped shape my brain in ways that may have protected me against certain risk-taking behaviors. You see, when you eat, when you spend time with loved ones, when individuals mate, we all experience a burst of dopamine in our brain. Dopamine, as some of you may know, is the brain chemical that is most associated with reward or those feel-good sensations that accompany many behaviors. particularly what we call naturally rewarding behaviors, which are also behaviors that are important for our survival. But in reality, this can also include those feelings that come to you from loving others or receiving love. In fact, love, whether experienced, given, or received, engages key brain regions associated with reward, motivation, and emotional regulation. But these are the same regions that are affected, impacted, or hijacked by addictive substances. Effectively, when you do something that is naturally rewarding, a part of your brain called the ventral tegmental area lights up. The VTA, for short, is also a major recipient of sensory information, or information about all the things that are going around you. This activity, this increased activity in your VTA, in the presence of something that would be rewarding, triggers the release of dopamine in another part of your brain called the nucleus accumbens. It's this increase of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens that we associate with euphoria of feeling good. We know this in part because experiments show that humans and animals will work towards obtaining a release of dopamine in their nucleus accumbens. Effectively, they will perform behaviors that directly lead to an increase in levels of dopamine. And as you might imagine, they'll also avoid behaviors or stimuli that decrease levels of dopamine. MRI studies, for example, revealed that rewarding behaviors, again, things like eating or being in the company of loved ones, increases levels of dopamine in this region. And conversely, depressive conditions are associated with decreasing levels of dopamine. So increasing levels of dopamine in your nucleus accumbens, an oversimplification, would suggest you feel good, and decreasing levels would suggest you don't feel so good. Imagine the excitement and satisfaction that comes from winning in the video game, and then contrast that with the negative feelings you might experience after repeatedly losing or failing to beat the game. That's a small contrast that helps me illustrate the highs and the lows associated with increases and decreases in levels of dopamine in this reward pathway. Drugs of abuse, for example, like cocaine or methamphetamine, hijack this very same pathway. They hijack the brain's dopamine system, creating artificial highs. But they do so much more strongly than do naturally rewarding behaviors, or more so than naturally rewarding behaviors ever could. As evidence of this, some years ago, we performed a study using an animal model where we measured levels of dopamine in males while they ejaculated. Our results showed a 25 to 35% increase in dopamine with ejaculation. This was followed by a depletion in dopamine levels shortly thereafter during a period that we call the refractory period or the post-ejaculatory interval. This is a period of sexual inactivity or sexual quiescence that occurs after ejaculation, and it's experienced by most male species, including humans. Using the same animal model, we subsequently administered cocaine and measured levels of dopamine in the same brain area. And in that experiment, we found a 400 to 500% increase in levels of dopamine after cocaine administration. So 25 to 35% from what we call baseline increases in levels of dopamine with ejaculation contrast with 400 to 500% increases after cocaine administration. So approximately a 20 times larger effect than with ejaculation. So let that sink in for just a second. But that's not the only difference that we found. After cocaine, we observed a significant and prolonged depletion in levels of dopamine, which placed the animals in what we call a state of apathy. After ejaculation, it took only minutes for the animals to recover. After cocaine, it took significantly longer. So yes, both sex and drugs will increase levels of dopamine, but drugs do so on a much, much larger scale. And the other major difference is that love does not crash the dopamine system the way that drugs do. So indeed, love and social bonds activate the dopamine system, and they do so naturally and sustainably. This is good. They also activate another brain chemical that we call oxytocin. Oxytocin is, in fact, a hormone, and oxytocin is an incredible little hormone. It plays a variety of important functions in social bonding, love, and childbirth. In fact, it was first discovered with experiments related or looking into childbirth. During sexual activity or childbirth, oxytocin is released into the bloodstream. It is often referred to as the love hormone for that particular reason. And it's one of the major reasons you become bonded to your partner, to your children, or even to your friends. But what I'm here to tell you is that oxytocin can also be thought of as a protective hormone. You see, oxytocin, in addition to its active role in love and bonding, can counteract the effects of stress and has been shown to reduce cravings for drugs. This is true even in animal studies, which have shown that while drugs of abuse can impair social bonding, pair bonding or love itself, conversely, will reduce the feel-good effects of the drugs, likely through oxytocin activity. Effectively, oxytocin helps promote feelings of relaxation and well-being, and this has been shown in a variety of studies. In one study, for example, administration of oxytocin was shown to reduce response to a variety of stressful stimuli. More specifically, oxytocin administration decreased cortisol levels. And if you don't know what cortisol is, it's also a hormone, but it's often used as a marker of stress response. Oxytocin has also been shown to decrease anxiety during social stress tests in healthy individuals. Other studies have also shown a calming effect after intranasal administration or nose-administered oxytocin. In the brain specifically, oxytocin has been shown to decrease activity in the amygdala in the presence of a stressful stimuli. For those of you who don't know, and if you don't, you will now, the amygdala is the part of your brain that regulates or processes fear. So you can see here before me, you can see the responses with no oxytocin versus oxytocin administration in the presence of a stressful stimuli. So yes, these are only a small sample of the studies showing beneficial impact of oxytocin on stress response. But by now you might be wondering, what is the connection between oxytocin and drug abuse or addiction? Well, the answer to that question lies in understanding the following. Stress is one of the main factors that can trigger relapse or substance use disorder. So as for me, for example, no doubt, growing up in the environment I grew up in, I had my fair share of stress. Not knowing, for example, who might jump me or try to rob me on my way to my bus stop can understandably be a stressful situation. But having a meal on the table when I returned home from school, having unconditional love and support were luxuries that my friend Carlos sadly did not receive. I didn't know it then, but I know this now. And while this is a topic of great interest to many researchers, theoretically, these moments of love provided my brain with sustainable sources of dopamine and oxytocin. I was as a result, to focus on my relationships, my education, and my own health without the need for search for oxytocin and dopamine in other ways, as would be true for drugs. So the working hypothesis is simple. Love and support from loved ones provide natural levels of dopamine and oxytocin sufficient enough to minimize the yearning to seek other sources of dopamine, again, as would be true with illicit drugs. I want to make something clear at this point. I am not suggesting that those who struggle with addiction are not loved, but rather that we should use love and support as one mitigating factor in the battle against substance use disorder. I like to think that the love and support I received growing up as a child strengthened my brain in such a way that I was able to not become another statistic or victim of my environment. So if you take anything from my presentation today, let it be this. I invite you to please hug your kids, for those of you who have them. I invite you to ask your friends to lunch or to dinner and enjoy their presence. I invite you to fall in love others, or love yourself. This may help provide the necessary shield to protect you and others from outside stressors and their effects on things like drug abuse. So it's my hope that with my own experiences of understanding the protective power of love, I can now pass this shield of love to my own recently born son. And I hope also that the day will come when he will then pass the shield on to his own children. Thank you.